What happens when a billionaire, the CEO of an airline, is denied his seat in first class? You're about to find out. But this isn't just a case of bad service. This is a story of power, prejudice, and revenge, one that will shake an entire airline to its core. Marcus Carter, a name that might not sound familiar to many, but on June 20th, 2025, it will become synonymous with justice, power, and the fight against systemic bias. This wasn't just any flight. This wasn't just any passenger. Marcus, the 25% owner of Horizon Airlines, found himself in a battle with his own staff over a first-class seat. It all began quietly enough. He walked down the jet bridge, boarding Horizon Airlines Flight 227 at Chicago O'Hare, a sleek airport lounge, the kind where passengers are used to smooth sailing. The first-class cabin was calm, plush, and as expected, the epitome of luxury. But as Marcus walked down the aisle, no one knew what would unfold next. Dressed simply in a black t-shirt and jeans, Marcus didn't stand out in the usual crowd of business travelers. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit or flashing a Rolex. He looked like just another regular guy, a regular passenger. That is, until he reached his seat. And that's when everything went wrong. Flight attendant Nicole Harris, 35, looked him up and down, then scanned the boarding pass he handed over. Without a word, she said flatly, "Sir, I think you're in the wrong cabin." Marcus blinked in confusion. What did she mean? His ticket clearly read to a first class. But Nicole didn't even glance at it for long. "That seat's been reassigned," she said, dismissing him as though he were some nuisance. And that's when things got ugly. Brian Foster, another flight attendant who'd been standing by, flashed a smug grin and joined in, "Yeah, man, are you sure you're in the right place? Looks like economy is more your style." Marcus could feel the shift in the air. He wasn't being treated like a paying customer. He was being judged. The crew didn't care what his ticket said. They were making assumptions based on his clothes, his appearance. Assumptions that would cost him everything. And this wasn't just a case of bad service. This wasn't about someone getting bumped from a seat. This was about the way Marcus was being treated because of how he looked. He wasn't dressed in a suit. He wasn't wealthy in their eyes. So he didn't belong. At least, that's what they thought. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Marcus wasn't just any passenger. He was the CEO of Horizon Airlines, a man who owned a significant stake in the company. He wasn't just someone who bought a first-class seat. He was someone who owned part of the very airline that was now mistreating him. Still, Marcus remained calm. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. Instead, he handed Nicole his driver's license and his boarding pass, showing that he had every right to be there. "This is 2A first class," he said, his voice steady. Nicole, however, barely even looked at the documents. "This has to be fake," she scoffed. At that moment, Marcus realized the severity of the situation. This wasn't just about a seat. It wasn't even about a simple mistake. This was about discrimination. This was about bias. The captain, Daniel Pierce, soon appeared, with a tone that was cold and dismissive. He sided with the crew. "Sir, if you don't comply, we'll have to remove you. We have VIP guests who need that seat." And with that, the situation went from bad to worse. The VIP guests were Richard and Laura Bennett, a wealthy white couple seated behind Marcus. They were already settled in their first-class seats with champagne glasses in hand, their platinum medallion tags flashing like a silent signal that they were more important than the man who was being told to leave. Marcus sat still, his jaw clenched. "I'm not moving," he said calmly. That's when Linda Walsh, a security officer, entered the picture. "Sir, I'm giving you one warning. Either vacate the seat or you'll be escorted off the plane." But Marcus wasn't budging. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply looked him in the eye and said, "You're making a mistake." The drama unfolding was about more than just this moment. It was about everything Marcus had fought for in his life. A fight to prove that people like him, people from his background, could make it in places where they were told they didn't belong. In the back of the plane, passengers were starting to take notice. One by one, phones came out, and the video started rolling. They saw what was happening, and they weren't about to let it go unnoticed. Emma Larson, a 38-year-old passenger from Minnesota, pulled out her phone and began recording. "This is discrimination," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for those around her to hear. Michael Grant, 42, from Florida, nodded in agreement. This is going to blow up. Watch. As the tension escalated, Nicole and Brian didn't back down. They mocked Marcus behind his back, making cruel comments about his appearance, laughing about how he didn't belong. They didn't know who he was, but they were about to learn the truth in the most dramatic way possible. And Marcus, still calm and composed, knew exactly what was about to happen next. This wasn't just about a seat. This was about exposing a problem at the heart of the airline. It was about standing up to the prejudice that had been hidden under the surface for far too long. The tension in the cabin was palpable. What started as a simple case of seat confusion had now spiraled into a standoff. But Marcus Carter, still seated calmly in 2A, wasn't backing down. He wasn't a man who was going to let this pass. Not now, not ever. By now, the air was thick with whispers. Some passengers were watching. Others were starting to film. And a few were even speaking up. The mood had shifted from confusion to disbelief, and people were beginning to realize that something was terribly wrong. They could see the discrimination playing out in real time. A man in jeans and a black T-shirt being treated like he didn't belong in a seat he had paid for, all because of how he looked. Emma Larson, her phone in hand, was still recording, her voice shaky but resolute as she whispered, "This is so wrong. He hasn't even raised his voice, and they're treating him like this." Her seatmate, Michael Grant, nodded, his phone still trained on the scene. It's not about the seat. It's about how they're treating him. This has nothing to do with policy. It's all about his appearance. As the passengers began to make their discomfort known, Marcus remained calm, his eyes locked on the flight attendants. Nicole and Brian had underestimated him. They thought they could push him around. But Marcus wasn't just any passenger. He was the CEO, the one who could make or break careers in an instant. But he wasn't going to make it personal yet. Not until he was sure that the crew had truly crossed the line. The crew, however, was continuing their intimidation. Nicole, who had already dismissed Marcus' boarding pass, was now mocking him openly. "You people carry fake cards now?" She laughed loudly enough for the whole cabin to hear. Marcus remained silent, pulling out a black business card, thick and matte, engraved with his name. He handed it over to Nicole with a steady hand. Saying nothing, Nicole took it and stared at the card for a second before tossing it back onto the seat. She barely glanced at it, and when she did, she scoffed. "What's this supposed to prove? You think you're some VIP?" She was trying to save face, but it was clear that she wasn't seeing the bigger picture. She didn't realize who she was dealing with. Captain Daniel Pierce, having witnessed the ongoing standoff, walked down the aisle. His presence was authoritative, and the rest of the passengers fell silent as he approached. "Sir, I need you to comply," he said in a no-nonsense tone, his eyes narrowing on Marcus. Marcus didn't flinch. "I've already complied. This is my seat. My ticket is valid. Your staff is the one making a mistake." His voice was calm, firm, and unwavering. But Captain Daniel wasn't backing down either. "If you don't leave now, you'll be escorted off the plane. We have VIPs that need that seat, and we're following FAA guidelines." FAA guidelines. That line hung in the air like a sword, as if it were the final word in the matter. But Marcus wasn't going to let that be the end of it. He could see where this was going. They were more concerned about keeping the Bennetts happy than upholding any sense of fairness or respect. The FAA guidelines were nothing more than an excuse for their behavior. Meanwhile, Mia Lang, a young flight attendant on her first solo assignment, stood frozen in the galley, watching in disbelief. She had been a witness to the whole exchange, and she knew what was happening wasn't right. Mia was new, but she wasn't blind. She had already seen enough to understand that what was happening to Marcus wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something much worse, something personal. Mia hesitated for a moment, but then her conscience got the better of her. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. "Actually, I saw it scan green. His ticket is valid." Nicole snapped back. "Stay out of this, Mia. You don't know what you're talking about," she growled. But Mia didn't back down. She knew she had to do the right thing. She wasn't about to let Nicole's arrogance ruin another person's dignity. As Mia retreated, She discreetly pulled out her phone, tapping the audio record button. She knew she had to get this on tape. What she was witnessing needed to be documented. As the crew continued to escalate the situation, a few other passengers began to get involved. Emma Larson, still filming, muttered, "This is going to blow up. The world needs to see this." Michael Grant, who was now recording from a different angle, added, "It's disgusting. They're lying about his boarding pass. They're lying about everything." At that moment, everything changed. Nicole was no longer just dealing with a passenger who might be inconvenienced. She was dealing with a crowd of people who were witnessing what was happening, and they weren't going to stay silent. As Emma's video began to go live on X and TikTok with the hashtag Horizon Shock, it didn't take long for the views to climb. Within minutes, tens of thousands of people were seeing the injustice unfold, and the pressure on Horizon Airlines began to mount. The narrative was shifting. No longer could they pretend that this was a minor issue. Now, it was a public relations disaster in the making. Marcus was fully aware of what was happening. As the crew and the Bennetts continued to act as though he wasn't there, he pulled out his phone again and called his executive assistant, Rachel. "Rachel, log this. Contact the board. This is going to be a situation. I need you to send out alerts now." Within seconds, Rachel's voice was in his ear, calm and efficient. "Already on it, Marcus. Alerts are going out. The board's aware." And that was when the full weight of the situation hit home for everyone involved. This wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't even just about Nicole or Brian's mistake. This was about a system that had failed, a system built on assumptions, biases, and favoritism. Nicole, still unaware of the storm she just triggered, continued her mocking tone. "Recording us for what? You think this is some YouTube drama?" What she didn't know was that this wasn't a viral video. This was the beginning of a new chapter for Horizon Airlines. A chapter that would be written not by the powerful, but by the people who decided enough was enough. The clock was ticking, and the tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Passengers were no longer just passive observers. They were witnesses to an unfolding drama, a battle between right and wrong, power and arrogance. And what was happening here, on Horizon Airlines Flight 227, was about to go viral, but not in the way the crew thought. Emma Larson, the 38-year-old woman from Minnesota, was still filming, her camera aimed directly at the flight attendants. She could feel the shift in the air. What had started as a seemingly trivial misunderstanding about a seat had now escalated into something far bigger. People were no longer just seeing a man being unjustly treated. They were seeing the system in action, a system built on assumptions, biases, and inequality. Marcus Carter, the quiet, unassuming man in seat 2A, had been judged based on nothing more than his appearance. He wasn't rich enough, important enough, or flashy enough to be in first class. Or at least, that's what Nicole Harris and her colleagues thought. They didn't realize the storm they were walking into. Now, things were changing. The passengers weren't just watching. They were speaking up. They were taking a stand, not just for Marcus, but for the fairness they all deserved. "You can't just throw someone off the plane because of how they look," Emma said loudly, her phone recording every word. "He paid for that seat. His ticket's legit. You're treating him like this because of what? His clothes?" Her voice rang through the cabin, shaking the flight attendants out of their dismissive haze. Nicole shot her a look, but Emma didn't back down. "This is discrimination," she repeated, her tone now sharp and clear. "And I'm not going to sit back and watch it happen." Michael Grant, sitting a few rows back, chimed in, "Exactly. This is a mess. And it's all on you." His voice wasn't just angry. It was laced with disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom what was unfolding in front of him. He raised his phone, zooming in on the crew. "You're going to lose your jobs over this. Watch." And just like that, the cabin became a battleground. The flight attendants were no longer in control. The passengers were. Nicole, still pretending to be in charge, looked around nervously as she realized the crowd wasn't on her side anymore. Instead of backing down, she tried to double down. "You can all stay seated or you'll be escorted off the plane too," she snapped, trying to regain some sense of authority. But the passengers weren't intimidated. A few stood up, blocking the aisle, their phones in the air. Some whispered, others shouted, but all of them were united in one thing. They were done letting the crew get away with this. You don't just get to tear up someone's boarding pass because you don't like how they look. One passenger said from the back, his voice rising with anger, "Yeah, you're destroying evidence." Another added, shaking their head, "You should be ashamed." Nicole looked flustered, realizing she was losing control. She grabbed Marcus' boarding pass again and tore it down the middle, her hand shaking slightly. It wasn't just a mistake now. It was a clear attempt to erase the truth. But Marcus wasn't fazed. He'd already made up his mind. He wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not ever. "Are you seriously doing this?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying enough weight to make Nicole freeze. She looked at him, confused. "You're ruining this company," Marcus added, his tone icy. "You can't say that to me," Nicole hissed. "This is policy." "Policy?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising now. "Your policy is a joke. This isn't about policy. This is about power. You're treating me like this because of how I look, and I won't stand for it." The cabin fell into an uncomfortable silence. The crew's facade was starting to crack. And that's when Marcus pulled out his phone again, his fingers moving quickly as he dialed Rachel Harris, his executive assistant. "Rachel, send the alerts," he said calmly, his voice low but firm. "Contact the board. Let them know what's happening. This is bigger than just a seat." Rachel's voice came through instantly. "Already on it, Marcus. The board is aware. I'm sending the alerts now." It was at this exact moment that the realization hit Nicole and her crew. This wasn't just any passenger. This wasn't just some regular guy. Marcus Carter wasn't the type of man you could push around, and they were about to learn the hard way, but they still didn't get it. Nicole, trying to save face, turned to her colleagues and scoffed. "Recording us or what? Do you think the board will care about this? Who's going to believe you?" Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he simply dialed another number, speaking quietly into his phone. "Rachel, send the audio to James, Sarah, and David. We're about to escalate this." At that moment, a passenger sitting a few rows back leaned over and whispered to her companion, "Is this that guy?" The billionaire guy. The word spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the truth hit everyone. Marcus wasn't just anyone. He wasn't a random passenger being mistreated. He was Marcus Carter, the CEO of Horizon Airlines, and he had just been publicly humiliated by the very people who work for him. Nicole's smirk faltered. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice cracking. "Carter? Marcus Carter?" That's when it all began to unravel. The video footage from Emma's phone had already started spreading on social media. It wasn't just a few people now. It was thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions. Hashtags like #HorizonShock were trending across multiple platforms. Marcus Carter, the CEO of Horizon Airlines, had just been denied a seat in first class, and now the whole world knew about it. And that's when Marcus stood up, his presence more powerful than ever. The quiet man in the black T-shirt was no longer just a passenger. He was a man who had been wronged, and he was about to make sure that everyone knew it. The cabin was now in chaos, but not in the way the flight attendants had expected. The situation had gone far beyond an ordinary misunderstanding, and the truth was unraveling at lightning speed. The words Marcus Carter were no longer just a name. They were a revelation. And Nicole Harris, Brian Foster, Captain Daniel Pierce, and the rest of the crew were about to realize the weight of their mistake. By now, the reality of who Marcus was had begun to sink in. The atmosphere shifted from disbelief to unease. Nicole stood frozen, her eyes wide, her lips trembling as she tried to process what had just been said. Marcus Carter, CEO, 25% owner of Horizon Airlines. The man they had tried to push around, the man they'd humiliated in front of the entire cabin, wasn't just any ordinary passenger. He was the very person who owned a piece of their company, the one who signed their paychecks. The moment the words left his mouth, everything changed. Marcus stood up, his presence in the aisle commanding attention. He wasn't angry, but there was a fire in his eyes, a quiet, dangerous calm that spoke volumes. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to demand anything. All he had to do was speak the truth. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "You're treating me like I don't belong here, but I own part of this airline, and you just disrespected me and every other passenger in this cabin." Nicole looked around, and for the first time, the reality of her situation began to settle in. Passengers weren't looking at Marcus with confusion anymore. They were looking at him with respect. Some nodded in silent understanding. Others whispered to each other. The atmosphere in the cabin now charged with a sense of solidarity. But it wasn't just the passengers. It was a flight crew, too. Captain Daniel Pierce, once so certain of his authority, now seemed out of place, unsure of how to proceed. He glanced at his fellow crew members, but their confidence was slipping. Brian Foster, who had been so smug moments before, was now visibly uncomfortable. We didn't know who you were," Nicole stammered, her voice unsteady. The facade of control she had tried to maintain was quickly crumbling. Marcus wasn't having it. "No, you didn't. But that's the problem. You didn't even bother to check. You assumed, based on my clothes, that I didn't belong. But that's not how it works here. Not anymore." The room seemed to hold its breath. The stakes had been raised beyond anyone's expectations. This wasn't just about a man being wronged. It was about the power dynamics that underpinned this entire situation. The privilege. The assumption that because Marcus didn't look the part, he couldn't possibly belong in first class. And that was a mistake that was about to cost Horizon Airlines and its crew everything. Marcus turned to the passengers, his voice growing stronger. "You all saw it. You saw how I was treated. You saw how Nicole and Brian mocked me, ignored my boarding pass, and tried to make me disappear. But it wasn't just me. It was all of you. They treated me like I didn't matter because of how I look. But now you know who I am. And now, I'm going to make sure you all see what happens when people are treated like this." At that moment, the tension in the cabin reached a boiling point. The passengers, once quiet, began to speak out. The passengers who'd been filming everything weren't just observers anymore. They were part of something bigger. Something that was about to change the way Horizon Airlines operated. Emma Larson, who had been filming the entire situation, stood up again, her phone in hand. "We're not just recording this for fun," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "We're recording this so the world can see how people are treated based on their appearance. How power and privilege let people get away with things like this." Marcus turned toward her, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't need to say anything. The weight of his gaze was enough to show his gratitude. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the bigger picture, the system of injustice that so many people have been forced to endure day after day without being able to speak out. In the back of the plane, passengers were already starting to post the videos online. Hashtags like #HorizonShock were trending. The truth was spreading faster than anyone could have anticipated, and Marcus wasn't going to let this moment slip away. The cabin fell silent again, the hum of the plane's engines now the only sound. Everyone was waiting for Marcus to make the next move, but he didn't need to say much. He just had to wait for the right moment. And when it came, he spoke again. "Nicole Bryan, Captain Daniel," he began, his voice cold and measured. "You've made a mistake. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences." The room seemed to shift, and for the first time, Nicole and Brian understood what was happening. Marcus wasn't going to let this go. He was going to make sure this wasn't just swept under the rug. This was about accountability. It was about ensuring that those who had wronged him and everyone like him were held responsible for their actions. But Marcus wasn't done yet. "Rachel," he spoke into his phone again, "tell the board to prepare for what's about to happen. I'm escalating this." Rachel's calm, authoritative voice came through immediately. "Already on it, Marcus. I've got the board on standby, and the legal team is ready. This is going to move fast." And just like that, the wheels were in motion. The passengers were now more than just witnesses. They were part of something bigger, something that would bring justice not just to Marcus, but to everyone who had been treated unfairly by a system built on assumptions, biases, and privilege. The crew had no idea what was coming next. They thought they could control the narrative. They thought they could erase Marcus from the system. But they had underestimated him. And they were about to find out the hard way. Marcus turned toward the crew, his gaze unflinching. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for anything except one thing, accountability. You're going to answer for what you did. All of you. The cabin was completely still. The passengers waited. The crew stood frozen. And Marcus Carter, the CEO, the man who had been disrespected for so long, was about to make sure that Horizon Airlines would never treat anyone like this again. Everything changed the moment Marcus Carter stood up. The seat 2A he was sitting in wasn't just a piece of real estate on an airplane. It was a symbol of power. And the moment he spoke, everything around him shifted. Nicole's face turned ghostly pale as she tried to keep her composure. She had been in control, or at least, she thought she had been. She had been dismissive of Marcus, ignoring his boarding pass, mocking him because of his clothes. But now, the truth had been revealed, and it was too late to take it back. She didn't know how to react, how to save face. The crew was in shock, and so were the passengers. But Marcus? He wasn't about to back down. Marcus didn't need to yell. He didn't need to get angry. His words were enough. This is my seat. This is my flight. And I'm not the one who's in the wrong here. His voice was calm, measured, but the power behind it was undeniable. The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. For a moment, no one knew what would happen next. Would the crew stand their ground and escalate the confrontation? Would they try to throw him off a plane? Or would they finally realize that the game had changed? But Marcus wasn't just confronting them in front of the other passengers. No, this was a battle of principles, a fight for respect. He was fighting for something much larger than just his own dignity. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of their appearance, their race, their clothes, or their background. And with each word, he was making that fight more public. The passengers who had been quietly observing now saw the truth. This wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't about some petty misunderstanding. It was about discrimination. And they weren't going to sit idly by and watch it happen. Emma Larson, who had been filming the entire situation, stood up and pointed her camera at Nicole. "You're not going to get away with this," she said, her voice strong. "We're all watching, and the world is about to see this, too." The camera caught Nicole's face, her eyes darting from Marcus to the other passengers who were starting to whisper. The video had already gone viral. It wasn't just being shared online. It was being talked about everywhere. News outlets were beginning to pick it up. And now, Nicole was starting to understand the weight of what she had done. Marcus, still composed, addressed the entire cabin. "This isn't about me. This is about all of us. Every one of you sitting here. Every one of you who has ever been judged for something you can't control. This is for you." His words rang out across the cabin. And for the first time, it wasn't just a confrontation between him and the crew. It was a confrontation with the whole system. The system that allowed people like Marcus to be treated like they didn't belong just because they didn't fit the image of someone who should be in first class. The passengers were no longer just observers. They were participants in this moment. And one by one, they began to speak up. "This isn't right," a man from the back of the plane called out. "We've all seen it. He deserves to be here just like anyone else." "I've been on flights where people get treated like this," another passenger added, her voice shaking with emotion. "This is not how it should be." As the passengers spoke up, the crew began to realize they had lost control. They thought they could intimidate Marcus, tell him to leave, and dismiss him, but they had underestimated him. And they had underestimated everyone else on the plane. Marcus stood tall, looking around at the passengers who were now on his side. "I'm not asking for any special treatment," he said. "I'm not asking for anything other than what I paid for. A seat, respect, and the right to be treated like any other person on this plane." Nicole, her face flushed with embarrassment, tried to salvage the situation. "This was a mistake," she stammered. "We didn't know who you were." Marcus shook his head. "That's the problem. You didn't know who I was. But even if I were just some regular guy off the street, I'd still deserve respect. You don't treat people like this, no matter who they are." Captain Daniel Pierce, who had remained silent until now, tried to assert his authority once again. "We're following protocol," he said firmly, but there was a noticeable tremor in his voice. This is a disruption to flight. You're following your protocol, Marcus corrected him, his tone cool and cutting. Not the protocol that should be in place to treat people fairly, equally, and respectfully. You're following an outdated system that judges people based on their appearance. The passengers were listening intently. The power had shifted. What started as an isolated incident was now a full-blown confrontation about the way society views people based on their skin color, clothing, and background. Marcus wasn't just talking about a plain seat anymore. He was talking about something much larger. The everyday microaggressions, biases, and discrimination that countless people face every single day. Nicole and the crew were learning that their biases had been exposed, and they couldn't hide behind them anymore. The passengers were no longer afraid to stand up and speak out. The quiet resistance that had begun with Marcus had now become a movement of its own. But Marcus wasn't done. He turned back to the crew. "You've been warned," he said, "and now the board is fully aware of what's going on here. You'll all be held accountable for your actions." Nicole's face went pale. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice quivering. "It means," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto hers, "that you're going to lose your jobs." There it was, the moment of truth, the moment when the balance of power had truly shifted, the moment when Marcus Carter, the man who had been dismissed and humiliated, finally took control of the situation. He had revealed his identity. He had spoken the truth. And now, it was time for the consequences to begin. The cabin was still. No one moved. No one spoke. But everyone understood. This was the beginning of something bigger than just a flight. This was the moment when the balance of power had shifted in the air, and the consequences of unchecked privilege and prejudice were about to be felt. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Every eye was now on Marcus Carter, and the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Nicole and Brian, who moments ago had thought they were in control of the situation, were now faced with the cold, unshakable truth. The man they had belittled, the man they had tried to push aside, was more powerful than they had ever imagined. Nicole's face had drained of color. She wasn't just embarrassed anymore. She was scared. The veneer of authority she had once worn so confidently had cracked. Now, all that was left was the realization that her actions were about to cost her everything. "You're going to lose your jobs," Marcus repeated, his voice calm but firm. He wasn't shouting, but his words hit like a hammer. "You can keep pretending you don't understand why this is happening, but the truth is clear. Your bias, your disrespect, it's all been recorded, and the board is aware." The crew stood frozen, as if paralyzed by the inevitable consequences of their actions. The sense of control they once held over the situation was slipping away, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Captain Daniel Pierce, who had remained quiet up until this point, finally spoke up, though his voice wavered. We didn't know who you were, Marcus. We thought you were just another passenger trying to sneak into first class." Marcus cut him off. "It doesn't matter who I am. It's about what I am, a paying customer with a valid ticket, who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It's not about my name. It's about how you treat people." The truth in Marcus's words hit the crew like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about one man being wronged. This was about how an entire system had been built on unfair assumptions, biases, and discrimination. It wasn't about policy anymore. It was about the actions of a few individuals who had let their personal prejudices take over. And now, the consequences were crashing down on them. Behind Marcus, the other passengers were watching with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had all been in the situation before at some point in their lives, treated unfairly, judged based on how they looked, or told they didn't belong because they didn't fit the mold. But this time, it was different. This time, the truth was being exposed, and they weren't going to let the crew get away with it. Emma Larson, her phone still recording, stood up and raised her voice. "You're fired. You deserve to be fired," she said, her words ringing with conviction. "You can't treat people like this, especially not on a plane that's supposed to represent luxury and service. You don't get to judge someone based on their clothes and expect no consequences." The cabin murmured in agreement. Some passengers nodded. Others whispered, "That's right," or "She's got it right." The crew had lost a room, and they knew it. The power had shifted completely. But Marcus wasn't finished. He wasn't just going to let this moment slip away. This isn't just about firing people, he said, turning to the crew. This is about creating change. Real change. Because what happened here today is bigger than all of you. It's about a culture that allowed this kind of behavior to go unchecked for far too long. And that's not something I'm going to let slide. He turned to passengers, his voice steady but filled with conviction. You all saw it. You saw how I was treated, how they ignored my ticket, mocked me for my clothes, and made assumptions about me that were not only wrong but completely unjust. But I'm not the only one this happens to. Every single person who has ever been told they don't belong based on their appearance, their race, their clothing. This is for you. For a moment, the cabin was still. No one spoke, but the weight of Marcus's words settled into the hearts of the passengers, and the energy in the room shifted again. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about all of them, about everyone who had ever been judged, dismissed, or treated unfairly by a system that favored a few over the many. The quiet resistance had turned into a full-blown movement, and it wasn't just happening in the cabin of Flight 227. It was happening on social media, too. Hashtags like #HorizonShock and #JusticeForMarcus were trending. The video was going viral, and people around the world were watching, waiting to see how Horizon Airlines would respond. But Marcus wasn't waiting for anyone to respond. He had already made his decision. Nicole, he said, turning to the flight attendant who had been the most vocal in her mistreatment of him. You're done. Your behavior is unacceptable, and it's time for you to face the consequences. Nicole's face twisted in shock and disbelief. You can't just fire me like this, she sputtered. You don't even have the authority. I have every authority, Marcus cut her off. As of right now, you're terminated. You and Brian both. And the captain, too. You've all been complicit in this behavior. And now you're going to answer for it. The crew stood frozen, their faces a mix of panic and disbelief. They had thought they were untouchable. They had thought they could get away with treating Marcus and others like him however they wanted. But now, they were about to lose everything. In the back of the plane, Mia Lang, the young trainee flight attendant who had originally spoken up in Marcus's defense, stood quietly by, watching the unfolding drama. She had witnessed everything, the lies, the mocking, the manipulation. But Mia had done the right thing. She had stood up when it mattered, even when everyone told her to stay quiet. And now, she was about to be rewarded for her bravery. Marcus. Rachel's voice came through his AirPods, breaking the silence. The board is ready. They reviewed the footage. They're backing you 100%. This is already being handled. Marcus nodded, turning to the crew. You've been fired. You're out. And you're never coming back to Horizon Airlines. Your access has been revoked. The crew was escorted off the plane, their heads hanging in shame as they walked down the aisle. For the first time, the passengers who had witnessed the entire ordeal felt like they were part of something real, something that would be remembered. The tension in the cabin began to ease. A few passengers began to clap, softly at first, but then more joined in. The sound grew not loud or thunderous, but steady. It was the sound of justice being served. And it wasn't just Marcus who had won. It was everyone in that cabin. As the crew was escorted off the plane, the energy shifted once again. Passengers who had been passive observers were now standing together, united in their support for what Marcus had done. This wasn't just about the flight. It was about what came next. The cabin was filled with an uneasy calm as the crew was escorted off the plane. The sound of their footsteps echoed down the aisle, each step a reminder of how quickly power could shift, how quickly the truth could come to light. The passengers, once silent observers, now felt the weight of the moment settle over them. They had witnessed something that would change the course of this flight, and possibly even the airline forever. Marcus Carter, CEO of Horizon Airlines, stood in the aisle, his posture straight, his gaze unwavering. His seat, the one that had been challenged, mocked, and nearly stolen from him, was now a symbol of victory. Not just for him, but for every person who had ever been judged based on their appearance, their race, or their background. As the plane began to settle back into its normal rhythm, Marcus turned toward the passengers, his voice low but powerful. Thank you, he said, his tone sincere. Thank you for standing up today. You didn't have to, but you did. And because of that, you've helped change the way this airline operates. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. The passengers, who had been nervously watching, began to nod in agreement. They had been silent at first, unsure of how to act, but now they knew they had been a part of something much bigger. They had been a part of a movement that wasn't just about one man's fight for a seat on a plane. It was about standing up to a system that treated people as less than based on their clothes, their race, or how they appeared. Emma Larson, who had been filming throughout the ordeal, turned to Marcus, her eyes full of respect. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," she said, her voice still trembling with emotion. "You stood up for all of us. And that takes more courage than most people will ever understand." Marcus smiled, though it was small, almost imperceptible. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "It took all of you speaking up, standing with me. It took all of us." He turned back to the crew members who had been involved in the debacle. Nicole, Brian, and Captain Daniel were now standing at the front of the plane, their heads hanging low in defeat. They had no more excuses. The truth was out, and there was nothing they could say to cover up the years of systemic issues they had been complicit in. Mia Lang, the young trainee who had first spoken up in Marcus's defense, stood at the back, watching the scene unfold with a quiet sense of triumph. She had been a part of this, too. She had stood up when it mattered, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And now, her bravery was being rewarded. Marcus noticed Mia standing there, and a quiet nod of acknowledgement passed between them. "Mia," he called out, "come here." Mia stepped forward hesitantly, unsure of what to expect. But when Marcus extended his hand, it wasn't just a gesture of respect. It was a recognition of everything she had done, everything she had risked to speak the truth. "Mia, you've shown more integrity today than some people do in a lifetime," Marcus said, his voice full of admiration. "I'm proud of you. You're getting promoted, effective immediately. You've earned it." Mia's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, what? I'm just a trainee. I don't." "You have more integrity in one day than some people do in their whole careers," Marcus interrupted with a smile. "And that's the kind of leadership we need at this company." Tears welled up in Mia's eyes as she took his hand. This wasn't just a promotion. It was validation for everything she had done, everything she had risked to do the right thing. The cabin began to fill with a quiet, respectful applause. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. It was a recognition of the change that had just taken place, a change that Marcus had set in motion, not with anger or force, but with calm authority and unwavering integrity. As the applause settled, Marcus turned toward the front of the plane, where the crew stood in shame. Nicole, Brian, and Daniel had been fired, their careers at Horizon Airlines now in ruins. But Marcus wasn't reveling in their downfall. He wasn't interested in punishing them. He was interested in making sure that this didn't happen again, that this was a moment when things changed. "We need a clean house," Marcus said quietly, his voice now carrying a weight of finality. "We need to make sure this never happens again. Horizon Airlines will be a company that treats everyone equally. No exceptions. No excuses." Rachel's voice came through Marcus's AirPods again, crisp and clear. "The board has already approved a full audit. We're bringing in new training protocols for the entire staff. We'll start with a complete overhaul of how we handle customer interactions. And we'll be publishing a public statement first thing in the morning. This will be a company-wide shift." Marcus nodded, a sense of resolve settling over him. "Good. This isn't about just fixing one problem. This is about fixing everything that's been broken for years." The rest of the flight was uneventful. The plane took off, and the passengers settled into their seats, though there was a noticeable sense of relief in the air. This wasn't just any flight. It wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about change. It was about making sure that everyone felt safe, respected, and valued, no matter who they were or how they looked. As the plane cruised at 32,000 feet, Marcus sat back in his seat, the weight of the past few hours finally lifting. He had taken a stand, and in doing so, he had done something far bigger than just securing his own dignity. He had sparked a revolution within his company, a revolution that would ripple out into the world. This wasn't just a moment for Marcus Carter. This was a moment for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or ignored. And now, Horizon Airlines was going to be a company that treated everyone with respect. No exceptions. Marcus smiled to himself, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. This was what leadership looked like, not from the top down, but from the heart up. It was about standing up when it mattered. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard. As the clouds parted and the sun broke through, Marcus looked out the window, his mind already turning to the future. He wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning.